Welcome to Round Hill Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, look for moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we talk about. We talk about faith. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning.
How you doing?
I'm well.
Good. I'm glad.
I think.
Maybe. It is a bright, early, crisp Monday morning here at Round Hill, so we're making things happen.
We are.
I like your hoodie.
For good.
Yeah, I love it. So we are on week 14 of our 52 for the journey. If you have your guidebook, it looks like this for our video viewers. For our audio listeners, I will read to you the lesson, which is, I'm glad is short.
Mercifully is in the New Revised Standard Version.
Yeah, right. For my reading skills, which turns out are not top notch for reading out loud, which is why I'm an organist. All right, so we have Mark 9, 2 through 8. This is, as Ed just said, the New Revised Standard Version. So here we go. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling bright, such as no one on earth could brighten them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. I have so many questions.
I'll bet you do.
So many, and I don't really know where to start. So I think let's start super big picture, which is I understand that this is known as the Transfiguration, right? Mm-hmm. I get that, but also why did it feel important to include this in our 52 journey? Let's start there.
Okay.
Why did it make the cut?
That's fair.
Start at the very beginning.
So I think one of the reasons this was important, so we chose the Mark version of this. It's in the other, it appears more than once in the Gospels.
Okay.
So clearly it was important, right? Mm-hmm. Because when things get included more than one time, that's definitely like a little underscore to say, pay attention to this.
Hey guys.
Yeah, heads up.
Yeah.
So one reason is that in the Gospel according to Mark, this is almost halfway through the gospel.
Okay.
And geographically, it's the peak. So that what happens is they're kind of going up in a sense, and they will get to this high mountain where they have this amazing experience, right? But now they're going to go down, and they're going to head towards Jerusalem. Jesus has already made it clear that he's told them about the end and the suffering that's going to accompany that. They didn't want to hear that, particularly Peter.
Sure.
And so he takes this very small group of friends, and down they go into the valley and eventually to Jerusalem and crucifixion. So it's a peak moment in the sense that it's like taking out that old, thick marker and just underlining several times, listen to him. Those are the words that really come through here. And this is a direct voice from the heavens that says, this is the person you want to be paying attention to and listen to everything that he says. And I think, so that's one big reason in that it just has this focal point quality to it, right? And then I will say that there's kind of a personal thing about this. So I read many years ago, I was reading a wonderful book about the civil rights movement. And I found out that the pastor who was the senior pastor before Martin Luther King Jr. became pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery was a man named Vernon Johns. And he was kind of everything that Martin Luther King, he was very different from Martin Luther King.
Okay.
He didn't have the sense of polish and just a very, very different kind, lots of rough edges.
Okay.
So the congregation didn't really like him a whole lot and helped him to move on. But he was the kind of person who discovered, for example, that there used to be a series of books published every year called Great American Sermons. And he discovered that no black preacher had ever been included in the volumes of Great American Sermons. So he sat down and he wrote a sermon about the Transfiguration. And it was the first sermon included in that series, Great American Sermons, by a black preacher.
Yeah, good for him.
So I thought, there's a little connection with Black History Month.
I love that.
But there's a kind of personal connection, right, with this story, that for me, I think it's not only it has the central significance in the Gospels, but it's got this interesting connection in a way to our country's development. So for those reasons and more.
So I'm hearing it's a story that people have connected with time and time again, which has kind of made it so central. I love that image of sort of the mountaintop peak. And I think about, in the English class, we learned about like the shape of storytelling and the ebbs and flows of that.
Yep.
So I think that's really interesting. Nitty gritty question now.
Yeah.
Okay. So I picture these scenes in my mind, and Peter, Jesus is like glowing.
Yeah.
Right. The only word I can think of this story is fantastical.
Yeah.
And I mean that in a positive way.
Radiant with a capital R.
Yes, exactly. Oh, just full caps. And so, and then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And all I can picture is him just being like, say something, do something helpful, which I have a similar energy sometimes. And so I can really see myself and Peter just being like,
yeah. When some people get nervous, they start talking.
Yeah.
This is Peter.
Hi. And then, who is he in the next sentence? Because it says he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Is that Peter being like, I didn't know what to say, so I said tents?
That's him.
Okay. Because that didn't necessarily make sense to me, but I appreciate that because I just picture Peter, poor Peter.
He didn't know what to say. Didn't stop him from saying something.
Right. I love that there's that commentary of he didn't know what to say, so he suggested tents.
Yeah,
which is sort of endearing, I suppose.
It is endearing. Yeah, there's got to be some way to kind of, put a happy face on this.
Yeah. It's like I don't know what to do, and I think it's also interesting that. Kind of the order again, which I think we've talked about in other lessons we've looked at. So he was transfigured before them and he's dazzling bright. And then God is like, see, listen to him versus God saying, see, listen to him. And then he goes sparkle, sparkle.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just being a little silly today. But, it's sort of that order I think is very interesting. So
it is.
So why do we think he sort of went up to a high mountain and then it says, and he was transfigured before them? So what does that mean?
Well, there's been some discussion before this passage about the necessity of his suffering.
Okay.
And that's something the disciples did not want to hear.
Sure.
Right? So there was resistance. And it's interesting that I hadn't really actually thought about this till you asked the question, so thank you.
Hey.
That, in the aftermath of all of that, what happens? Well, he goes up and has this, I don't know what to call it, mystical experience, right? But it's not a private mystical experience because the disciples, and he only takes a few of them, so he's kind of got an inner circle there,
sure,
right? He takes the inner circle up and they see this. So it's secret, but it's not completely secret yet. Some versions, I think there's a sense in which Jesus, doesn't want them sharing this news around a lot. But I think it has something to do with the fact that even though he is completely human, is going to suffer, is going to die, there is a kind of glory about this person, majesty about him that goes right alongside with the humanity.
Yeah.
So maybe it's also saying something about us. But I think that's a little of what's going on here. Combination of those two powerful forces, fully human, yet fully holy, fully spiritual.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting because actually last week, I know you guys missed us so much. We didn't record a podcast, but I think that's really interesting because if I can look back at last week a little bit, and I tell you how much I just loved that you started your message yesterday, basically being like, Jesus was wrong. And I love that. Like, it's something that's helpful to hear. But we had last week this fully human expression of Jesus. This Jesus is learning. Jesus makes mistakes. Flip to this week, Jesus is divine, capital D.
Yeah,
And so I think that's a really interesting how you put them together next to each other. I'll assume you did that on purpose.
Well, I'm not going to show my cards. But since you say that, what's interesting, of course, if you add Moses and Elijah into the mix,
right,
you have two other people who, are remembered not only for the glorious things they did, but for the inglorious things they did. Poor Moses doesn't even get to enter into the promised land after everything he went through because of a judgment error. And Elijah is kind of all over the map. He's capable of resurrecting a dead child, of providing food in the midst of famine, and he also slaughters, dozens and dozens of people. So you get these very complicated pictures of these people. And if you just take a look, if we read carefully through all of the stories that are attributed to Jesus, right? Whether or not he told them, that's another question. But let's say all the stories attributed to Jesus. Are we saying that he wouldn't want some of them back?
Right. Yeah.
There are some really, really difficult words and passages that are connected to him that have wound up creating difficulty for people's lives because of what was done in his name, right? So I think that I love what you're saying about this, that, in one sense, we get a fully human, vulnerable Jesus who's kind of still finding his way. And then you get a Jesus in this sense who's beyond.
Yeah. I'm thinking that if I can really zoom out, that Jesus as divine and then Jesus as humanity is like the ultimate expression of representation. And seeing yourself represented, which is to say, I'm super flawed, right? Humanity, it says we all have our flaws, we all have our strengths. But I'm thinking that in seeing Jesus's humanity and seeing Jesus's flaws, we are able to then connect with this person more than if Jesus was always perfect.
Right.
And if Jesus is always like up here and like, I would look at that and be like, well, I'm never going to achieve 1% of that. So why should I try? Versus Jesus learning and being like, I've been there. Oh, I've been in a situation similar to that. So maybe I could in everyday life be a little bit more like what Jesus learned to be. Maybe I could learn to be a little bit more like that. And so in seeing that representation of humanity, we are then able to put ourselves in those shoes more easily and maybe strive that little bit harder to be better versions of ourselves, better neighbors, kinder, more inclusive, more welcoming.
I love that. I mean, I really do. And I think that in some ways, in significant ways, it makes him much more accessible.
Yeah.
And it brings within reach, not only the admission that, all right, there are some rough edges here to this person. They weren't all smoothed out. God bless the authors who created these stories, right, for not smoothing out all the rough edges. But likewise, they bring within our, into our sphere, all of those extraordinary things that he did. And that sort of puts I would call an invitational question mark over our lives. So what does that mean for us, right? In one of the Gospels, he will say to his followers, greater things shall you do than I have done. Now there's a mind bender.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Right? And I think that it carries from what you're saying. Those are the words of a person who he's profoundly human, and as part of his humanity, he carries with them this energy, right? This energy of life. And that's what makes him such a, fascinating person, and the way that he invites others to join him with him on that journey.
So we have this sort of this voice, right? We're assuming is God.
It's a voice.
I think it's a pretty easy. But this is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Yeah. It harkens back to the story we looked at a few weeks ago, where Jesus is baptized, and there's a similar sort of blessing, if you will. What do you think is the significance of those? These are sort of the two. Are these the two big times where God sort of spoke kind of about Jesus to other people?
Yeah, I would say these are two notable ones, especially because the language is so similar, right, from one to the next. And so you get this moment of intimacy at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, right? He says, "You're my son, right, the beloved, and with you I am well pleased." And he says that before Jesus has done anything, which is beautiful. It's not like you got to earn it, or you did some cool stuff or great stuff. No, this is just because I love you. Yeah. And this comes back again now. This is my son, the beloved, which is wonderful. This becomes, I think, it functions for Jesus as a way for him to get regrounded, reaffirmed, because he's now going to enter a much more difficult part of his life. And so I love the fact that takes place in the way that it does here. I think it's a centering moment, a reminder. It's kind of like you've heard someone say, "I love you," let's say throughout your life, but then someone says, "Hey, wait, listen to me.
Yeah.
I mean it. I love you."
Yeah.
And then he goes out and does what he needs to do next.
Right. I mean, if there's any sentence ever to repeat, it's "I love you."
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
What do you think is the significance of Peter and James and John being included in this?
This is a really puzzling part of this story.
Yeah.
Because it does suggest that Jesus has an inner circle.
Sure.
So maybe that's just it. Maybe he had an inner circle.
Closest buddies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That there are people that he just connects with in a way that he cannot connect maybe with the other disciples.
Sure.
And Peter's an interesting one in this mix, right? Because he's always the most impulsive. He's the one he wants to be first in line. He was the one who wants to walk on water, on and on it goes. But he's so
eager.
He's very eager.
He's eager.
he fumbles and stumbles his way along,
I find him very relatable.
Exactly. God bless him.
God bless Peter.
Right? So I don't think that I know more about this than that, but it would be an interesting thing to think about, that Jesus needed, there's a suggestion in a couple of other parts of the Gospels that Jesus had places where he could go, where he could really be himself, and where he had particularly close friends, Mary and Martha, and Lazarus, and Peter, James, and John. It's interesting that he had that in his life.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's important. I was just listening to a podcast recently on cultivating adult friendships and like the things, the fact that it's really hard. And it was like, basically it was Mel Robbins. So I think I've shared you stuff before. And she was talking about, I'm going to butcher this because it's been a hot minute, but it was, proximity of like how close, like how easy it is for you to see each other.
Yep.
And then time. And then basically she called it energy, but it's basically vibes.
Yeah.
Right. So like, do you get along? Is the energy, do you get along with each other? It's really as simple as that. And so I feel like with Peter and James and John, they're just, he's around them all the time. He's around a lot of people all the time, but there's some people you click with.
Yep.
Right. And that's not to say that the other people aren't good.
Yeah.
It's just, the vibes aren't perfect.
Jesus is going to call Peter Satan on one occasion. I mean, it's kind of a hard thing to hear. Yeah. I'm just saying.
Not great.
But you think about the things that sometimes really close friends can say to one another and get away with.
Sure.
And I think that's a really important, just listening to your comment there, that here's somebody, he can say anything. And Peter's like, that was kind of a hard thing to hear, Jesus, but I'm still here for you.
Aw.
Until he wasn't. But then he was again. So,
He's learning. He's learning.
Couldn't have been easy.
I have to say, if there's going to be like one thing I take away when I'm like, 85 and I'm picturing this stuff and I'm from this time, there's some pictures of the disciples just like very bumbly, which is a picture I never had before working with you. And I find that very, these characters, these people are coming to life in a way, especially through, I'm just really enjoying this 52 journey. I just think it's so interesting. And they're coming alive in a way that for me, these stories haven't come alive before.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Which is really, really cool. I'm really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying the opportunity to like ask multiple questions in multiple platforms. about him. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's been great. Your questions have been wonderful.
Oh, thanks. This is really fascinating. So we're only on week 14. We got a lot more good stuff. There's a chunky book of the book left.
Onward.
So we want to thank you guys so much for joining us today at Round Hill Radio. We'd love it if you'd leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That would be a huge help to us and get the word out about this little humble podcast that I'm super proud of. And so we thank you so much for listening. We're so glad you're here. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillradio.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, there are a few things that you can do that would make a big difference to us. Like the video, subscribe if you aren't, and click the notification bell and select all. Thank you.